Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Erin Kopek, and you have joined the Higher Level Workforce Management Workplace webinar. This is a monthly program that we have started in order to provide better value to our clients and partners and to educate you on different things that we think should be important for your business and, of course, that are important to higher level. A few things before we get started. This call will last close to 1 hour. Just so you all know, you are set up in listen-only mode, so you will not be able to actually speak during the presentation, but you will be able to facilitate your questions in the GoToWebinar question chat box in your control panel. So feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and Rhonda and I will do the best we can to answer those for you. So before we get started, I would like to introduce our presenter. Today we have Rhonda Carter-Adams. She is the program manager with Supplier Diversity at Illinois American Water. In this role, she currently works to enhance the company's relationships with diverse organizations to broaden the utilization of minority, women, and veteran suppliers, and develop strategies to attract diverse candidates for the company. Rhonda comes to the company from Mid-States Minority Development Council, where she served as executive director. In this role, she managed relationships with corporate members and recruited businesses in Central Illinois and Eastern Missouri to certify as minority business enterprises. Prior to that, Rhonda led the Supplier Diversity Initiative at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis and Caterpillar, Inc. Rhonda, I want to thank you again for joining us this morning and partnering with Higher Level, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, it is a pleasure to be able to speak on behalf of Higher Level as well as Illinois American Water to talk about a topic that is quite frankly as important as diversity. So Erin did indicate, I think there's a little bit of lag on the PowerPoint slide here. Sorry. There we go. So Erin told you a little bit about my resume. So with that being said, I kind of wanted you to understand a little bit about some of that and what it entails with regards to diversity as a topic as a whole. So I am the program manager for Supplier Diversity. However, I'm also our corporate lead in ensuring that we're addressing issues in diversity. And as you know, diversity has become a hot topic. And if you talk to some people, they don't really have a true meaning or feeling or understanding of what diversity really means. I even was talking with a state legislator, and she indicated to me that, you know, people still feel that diversity is this buzzword or it's a trend, but given the headlines that are happening today, and you're hearing them and they're appearing every day on the lack of diversity in an industry or in the workforce, you know, we can understand why this is such a initiative that should be addressed no matter what an organization looks like, no matter what the industry is. So again, part of the diversity and inclusion aspects and elements of how do we ensure that there is proper inclusion among our diverse employee base is critical not only to the organization's success, but also to what I do with regards to supplier diversity. And you'll hear a little bit more about that in just a moment. So I am moving on to the next slide. And bear with me, there seems to be still a little bit of a lag here.
Rhonda, let me see what I can do. Are you using your keyboard to advance?
Cursor. I'm using the cursor keys.
All right, try it again.
Okay.
I see the mouse moving, but for some reason it's not wanting to advance.
Okay. Yeah, it's trying, but it's thinking about it. So Well, to move forward with our dialogue and conversation today, again, just a few a conversation about what actually is diversity, what's the difference between diversity and inclusion, and just a better understanding of, in general, what supplier diversity is. So, everyone has their idea of what elements are encompassed in diversity. There is a full spectrum, a full range of differences among the human element, right? So I wanted to incorporate this graphic from Korn Ferry to show the many ways as humans that we are similar and yet different from one another that is encompassed in the definition of being diverse. So with that being said, diversity is a range of all these human differences that are included but not limited to just race and ethnicity, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, age. It also encompasses like social class, and you'll see that demonstrated here in the societal element, physical abilities, challenges that also have below it identifies with age and gender as well. You also have other attributes that relate to religion, ethical values that fall within the values system, the values element, national origin, political beliefs. All of these things are included really in the definition of diversity and what it means to be diverse. Now, diversity and inclusion actually includes all various aspects of addressing strategy around addressing all of these human elements, from relational to cognitive to physical to values, actual strategies that an organization has identified to ensure that their diverse employment, their diverse vendors is attributing to the culture of making everyone feel included and addressing policy and the procedures that are specific to a group of differences in the human element. Now, a lot of this is addressed in unconscious bias. I'm not sure if you've ever had any unconscious bias training, but that is a specific awareness and training that focuses on all of these biases that every individual owns and every individual has around any of these elements right here, any of these diverse differences. So a whole weekend could be devoted just to that type of training. But for the sake of this conversation, this presentation, we're going to focus primarily on the issues of diversity as it directly impacts the business opportunity and growth of an organization or a company. So primarily diverse hires and populations, and diversity around suppliers, vendors, and the business imperative, the business and economic imperative, right? All right, I tried my cursor key again, so it doesn't like that. So I'm just going to continue to right click. All right, so why diversity? Why diversity? Again, three main reasons why diversity is being addressed throughout several organizations, especially the corporations who consider themselves a great place to work. But there are also several ideas about, well, what does it mean to incorporate diversity? Well, achieving diversity in and of itself should not be your main goal. The goal is to include the inclusion, is to address inclusion, because that is where a lot of the return is going to be realized. So, and I'll show you how, and I'll demonstrate that in a bit. Right. So with regard to the human imperative, what often gets missed when we talk about diversity is the twin, it's inclusion. It's called inclusion. So what that means is just in making sure that there is strategy around including key people in decision-making processes that drive the company performance, right? So that encompasses ensuring that women are included in some of these conversations in meetings that may not have been included before. So even statistics have proven that the technology industry, for example, about 60% of those decisions are male driven, right? And so it is, the statistics will also show that the worst situation to have on an all-male team or a majority male team is the exclusion of a gender diverse group, right? And so again, part of that conversation is to ensure that we're incorporating practices within our own organization that addresses these issues. Having diversity without inclusion, you just result in metrics. You're just measuring information and measuring data without affecting a change in the culture, without affecting a change in the bottom line of the corporation, right? So again, it has been proven that inclusive teams make better decisions up to 87% of the time. And as I have a mentor who loves to say, to distinguish between the two, that taking someone to a dance is diverse, right? You're taking someone to the dance, that's diversity. But asking that person to dance, that's where inclusion comes in, right? So again, human capital, that is the most important asset and the largest expenditure of every corporation. Understanding what your diverse higher population looks like could be imperative to the bottom line of a corporation. So for example, within our organization, we ensure that there are specific practices around not only understanding what that diverse population looks like, but what strategies are we incorporating to reach out, engage, and do outreach. For example, in specific areas of our business, we want to look like the communities in which we serve, and recruiting a diverse base of employees that live within those communities, that look like those communities, that only enhances our, it affects our retention, it lessens the turnover rate for new hires, and again, that directly impacts the cost of the organization, right? Companies who capitalize on this diversity, they do so by already understanding what their population looks like. For example, we just discovered within our own corporation that we have several employees. We increased actually our veteran-owned population 270% by just incorporating policy and practices that address or ask the question, how do we know? What does our base look like? And that alone can help you identify immediately what your diverse base and what your diverse population is like. Now, from that metric, you begin to understand what you need to do to include those individuals with regards to now the decision-making processes. So let's move on to the next slide. Inclusive decision-making. Now, here is where the true value of D&I comes to play, right? So inclusive decision-making drives better company performance. It does give a decisive competitive advantage. Inclusive decision-making leads to better business decisions. Business teams drive decision-making twice as fast with half the meetings just by including your diverse base of employees into the conversation that directly impacts the business. I can attest to this, right? When I first came on board with Illinois American Water as the diversity lead, again, focusing on our diverse vendors, our diverse population and employment, understand what kind of activities that we're doing that incorporates and addresses the cultures, the various cultures within all of the elements of the spectrum that you just saw, correct? So our president and CEO decided that I needed to be a part of all of his senior level meetings to understand not only from an organizational point of view how we function, but when there's conversation around new capital projects or new things that are coming up, I can be at the conversation, in the conversation and at the table to say, well, have you thought about, have you, utilized, and that in and of itself, it increases the efficiency of having to have these external conversations, additional meetings and follow-up with regards to how do we address certain things that require immediate action, right? So again, if you're not already considering or have incorporated your diverse group of business function leads or program managers, so to speak, in senior level or executive type meetings, I encourage you to do so. This has proven within my company to be a tremendous, tremendous win. According to statistics, decision outcomes can improve by 60% just by evoking that inclusive decision-making process through adding diverse participants to those meetings. Now, companies can also put inclusive decision-making into practice by measuring and improving your metrics. Again, that's understanding who you're working with, who your employees are, how and what decision-making processes are included at every level of the business unit. So including, ensuring at a higher level that from an operational perspective, from a policy and procedural perspective, that you have a representative that can speak to those conversations. That is going to help tremendously. Include people throughout the decision-making process by framing up what that looks like. What does that collaboration look like? How do you commit to this business decisions to improve making the decision-making more effective and more efficient? Communicate what is decided and what is measured to other parts of the organization. This all, again, accelerates and lessens the number of additional meetings that you have to call in the future, right? So let's talk about the diversity and inclusion and how that impacts, again, the new generation, right? We're still on the human imperative of D&I. So millennials have a different view on what diversity and inclusion means, right? The millennial viewpoint, as you can see, they view diversity as the blending of different people, background, experiences. They have different perspectives within a team. They do collaborate more. Again, and this addresses the cognitive diversity element that we've seen in the graphic chart above, right? Cognitive diversity is a necessary element for creativity, for innovation, collaborative thinking, all of those ideas. 71% of millennials are more likely to focus on teamwork, right? Teamwork. And why is that important? Teams plus diversity, it does equal better decision making. On average, teams make better decisions than individuals about 66% of the time. Teams of people are better at identifying new and better choices, not considered, because some of those conversations and topics don't come to the conversation in a part of the discussion. This results in a better decision-making process overall. They bring more perspective to the table, more experience, information, and it helps reduce some of the biases that are not considered were not that conversations were diverse and collaborative, right? Also improves the accountability of people, making people accountable for their portion or part of a task with regards to an outcome. Being part of a boomer and generation Xer myself, I can attest to the definition of what diversity means to us. So from a baby boomer and generational Xer point of view, diversity is more or less a representation of what's fair, right? Protected classes, protection to all, regardless of gender, race, religion, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. One of the things that I am glad that I've seen evolve since my start of my diversity career at Caterpillar is how we view diversity and inclusion. 10 years ago, diversity was seen as the right thing to do, right? So companies embraced this diversity and indicated that we have to change our practices because it's the right thing to do. Well, diversity and inclusion is no longer just the right thing to do. There is a business imperative that directly impacts the bottom line, and we're going to talk about what these customer requirements can look like, what they entail, which is why it's directly attributed to a bottom line of a corporation. It's not just a moral and legal imperative any longer. as a matter of fact, when I present and I have conversations around diversity, I hate using this is the right thing to do. It's the right practice. It's what we should do to ensure that companies know we are a good place to work. No, it's not just about achieving compliance. It's not just about achieving a metric. It's not just about ensuring there's equality. It's ensuring that all of these things are in addressing the lack of inclusion on the decision-making process, which is what leads to all of the actual benefits, especially the bottom line benefits of a corporation. And here we go into the economic imperative. So as you can see, this slide will indicate how the human element, which is the people, how it is integrated with understanding the corporate needs, responding to government policy mandates. People make up these institutions, people make up these organizations that turn or create or develop an outcome, whether that is a manufactured product, whether it's professional services. It's the production of this process, the products and services through people that we address. Now, how is the economy involved, right? So all of this, people are involved in the process of creating products and services through methods that often give back to the community. It affects the economy in various ways. As a supplier diversity manager and corporate diversity lead, part of my responsibility is to understand how involving small businesses in our supply chain directly impacts our immediate surrounding communities around us. It puts those dollars back into the community, right? So we address specific areas of need by producing services and or products that contribute directly to the economy. Now, why is that important in the world of diversity? Well, through employment, we need to create our diverse workforces from the people that drive our products, that create our products, that live in our communities, that affect our supply chain, because these people in turn are going to come back around and be consumers, right? And they're going to consume and acquire and purchase the products and services that are being manufactured and produced through this organization. So it's just one big cycle of why this is important from an economic standpoint of how it is that we should be incorporating strategies within our organization that specifically address diverse issues. Basically, the conversation here, these are bullet points that talk to and speak to that slide. A diverse workforce drives that economic growth, right? We recruit diverse talent. We want to recruit employees that can help create the products and services that we need that result in a bottom line outcome, create revenue, right? And so if we cannot create a diverse workforce, we're risking being able to be competitive, to have the competitive advantage from an innovation perspective, from a creativity perspective. A diverse workforce can capture that greater share of the consumer market. If there's collaboration from the human perspective, from people and understanding what the market needs, how to address those gaps are sometimes not addressed because of unconscious bias. If you don't have a diverse group of people coming to the table to understand what the market needs are, right? So that can be an unconscious lapse and not an understanding completely and fully what the market requirements are if there's not conversation being had from a team perspective on what those needs are with a diverse team. Recruiting from a diverse pool of candidates. Obviously, sometimes this feels almost just automatic, right? You know, people think that if you have a diverse candidate of employees, it's just common sense that you would think that you would have a more qualified workforce. Even though we feel it's common sense, there are still industries that struggle with this notion, especially technology companies. Technology companies, for the most part, the decision makers are from the decision makers that drive some of the business imperatives and the growth strategies of the organization are more or less still men, right? And again, there has been research that has proven that by incorporating more diverse or even just women into those conversations, it addresses those areas that that keep that company stagnant with regards to ensuring that there are policies being addressed that are preventing that growth from reaching out to those markets. A diverse and inclusive workforce helps the business and avoid employee turnover. We've addressed that and we've kind of talked about that. Companies who suffer with high turnover also suffer with cultural issues with regards to diversity, right? I also came from an organization that had this challenge. There was no focused effort in the strategy to recruit diverse candidates. And with that being said, there was a lack of organizational culture that identified the needs of employees that were diverse on several of those levels, whether it is from a values perspective, cultural ethnicity, cultural perspective. There were just lapses within the organizations that prevented the organization from being able to sustain diverse employees because decision makers weren't incorporating diverse employees in those conversations to kind of address some of those areas that lack the opportunity to address how we become more attractive as an organization to diverse candidates. And once we obtain diverse candidates, what do? What brought diversity into a company isn't the same as what it will take to support that talent and retain that talent in the corporation. If you want to build a truly inclusive culture and one that leverages every individual's passion and commitment and innovation, elevates employee engagement, it is imperative that an organization or company leaders would be willing to break down some of those walls that create these unconscious bias that prevent them from reaching that talent and keeping that talent within the organization. Again, it goes back to the millennials. If you don't know where to start, ask your millennials. They are collaborative by the generational attributes. This is they work together as a team, and this is what drives them as a generation. Every one of them wants to be heard, right? It is critical that to retain even that millennial talent, you need to understand what is required to retain that. Diversity fosters a more creative and innovative workforce. We kind of addressed that and talked about that. And the adaptation that businesses have to go through. Businesses need to adapt to a changing nation. Again, this culture that we have now where every industry is being impacted by non-inclusive situations and circumstances. In order to be competitive in the economic market, those questions, those situations and circumstances need to be addressed. Diversity is a key aspect of entrepreneurialism, right? Again, going back to the millennial group, by nature, they work collaboratively as a team. And entrepreneurialism is not something that they shy away from. Many of the vendors that I work with now, and I see new businesses coming up, they are in that generation, right? So, and they are diverse in scope, and they do not shy away from a kind of ensuring that they are heard. They are heard, and this is very important to us as an organization. Someone who actively recruits and vets and tries to understand how do we identify key entrepreneurs who are diverse. Diversity in the workplace is necessary to create, again, the competitive economy in a globalized world, in a globalized sense. Diversity in the boardroom is needed to leverage a company's full potential. Again, we go back to that inclusive decision-making process. Directly measuring this inclusive behavior focuses attention on leadership actions Executives can take advantage of this today just by identifying those diverse employees, that diverse talent within and between the business units today, and just pulling them into meetings that are general and broad and that can impact the company's true bottom line. All right. Diversity is dividend, and this is just an example of the bottom line effect and the growth that diversity and incorporating diversity can yield. The likelihood that companies in the top quartile for diversity financially outperform those who are in the bottom quartile. 35% of ethnically diverse companies are more likely likely to outperform those that are not. 15% gender diverse companies more likely to outperform, right? So it goes above and beyond just gender diverse. We have to address the ethnically diverse, maybe opportunities there are to recruit talent across our organization, across our business units that can help add to that performance value of the corporation. I wanted to talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial side of diversity and inclusion. So, supplier diversity as an initiative speaks directly to not only identifying companies that are diverse owned, and I'll give you an example of what it means to be diverse owned, but also as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, how do we include them? How do you incorporate diversity and inclusion within your supply chain, within your operation? So I wanted to provide a few thoughts around that. So what is supply diversity in general? It's just good business, right? Again, it goes back to the business imperative for companies to remain competitive, because what that does is when you're identifying 3 or more or a range of businesses to provide a specific product or service, this is where the competitive advantage comes into play. This is where creativity and innovation takes place, right? You can kind of see, instead of always going with the incumbent, or instead of always utilizing the one vendor that this buyer knows from 15 years ago, you're offering the opportunity to increase the competitive aspect as well as create some additional value around innovation and understanding what the product and service that you're requiring can yield. Measuring cost reduction. Much of the efforts around supplier diversity is to address, again, opportunities to reduce costs in certain areas of the business, in the production of a product, in the production of the acquisition of a service. Again, all of that goes into what does it mean to incorporate supplier diversity into an organization, right? Ensuring that an RFP that is presented has a diverse response or participation of a veteran-owned business, right? Of a woman-owned business. That again just speaks to the opportunity there is to be exposed to more creativity, right? And what your requirement is. The competitive advantage with customers, again, it's going to satisfy the customer's requirement. What does the satisfaction of a customer requirement mean, right? So for all of those customers that we serve, many of those customers, for example, if you have a McDonald's account, if you have a Procter & Gamble account, guess what? They're wondering what an organization is doing now in their own practices to ensure that diversity and inclusion is being addressed. So that is part of the satisfying customer requirements that we're going to speak to, and you're kind of going to understand. I'll show you some examples on what a specific customer requirement looks like to ensure that it is exposing opportunity to diverse suppliers and vendors. Finally, doing business with diverse businesses and entrepreneurs. What is diverse? What does it mean to be a diverse business? a woman-owned business, and all of these categorizations are 51%. They're majority-led, right? Majority-owned. So diverse business categories from an entrepreneurial perspective is a woman-owned business, minority-owned business, veteran-owned business, service-disabled veteran, small disadvantaged business, hub zone business, and disadvantaged business. I won't go into details on what these all are, but these are all categories, kind of like the charting that kind of demonstrated the elements of the type of diverse human element differences. These are business categories that fall into what makes a company diverse. The value of a diverse business supply chain, again, it's the access in the market. You want to have access to more of the market share. And by doing that, you have to address the needs of the community for which you should serve, right? The customer loyalty, working with customers who are committed and who have diversity initiatives. We want to support their initiatives and ensure that we are adopting that same culture that they do as well. And again, the supply chain, when you talk about supply chain, you're automatically talking about your cost savings, the quality of the product or service for which you're wanting to acquire. This automatically evokes competition, innovation, and improves the flexibility that an organization has to work with one vendor and from another, right? Stakeholder satisfaction, that's, again, the customer requirement. Why is it that diversity and inclusion is important to Illinois American Water in one aspect? Is because it's important to our customers. Diverse business policies and procedures. We talk about the business and economic impact. These are examples of direct bottom line impact, right? So for a company that creates strategy to recruit diverse hires, to recruit a diverse population of talent, to help us provide a service to the community for which we serve, that means we also want to support the businesses in the community for which we serve. That goes back to that economic cycle from people to organizations and institutions to our community, and the whole cycle of the integration of all of those elements. These are examples of policies that are not uncommon to corporations who are committed to diversity and inclusion efforts, right? So what you will find is, especially if you are a business owner that is looking to find opportunities with organizations, top 50, Fortune 50, top 100, Fortune 100 companies, you're going to find that these policies are being employed within every organization. So the maximum practical opportunity to compete or participate for contracts is key. So it is imperative that we offer every business a fair opportunity to compete. We have a specific metric that says we will have utilization of 10%, 5% of diverse suppliers, whatever it is that an organization deems that they want that effort to be reflected in the community. They have employed that in their policies and procedures, right? Vendors shall regularly report what costs and what spend and what purchases that they have with other diverse owned businesses. So these are examples. I won't go into all of these specific details, but in order for you to be a part of Illinois American Water and the plethora of other organizations that have diversity and inclusion initiatives, these are commonplace policies, procedures, and practices that exist within these business units. Businesses who do not meet these expectations are challenged. They are required to submit opportunities to improve that or document what they are trying to do with regards to incorporating strategies that recruit diverse people within their organization, that also recruit diverse suppliers that they even utilize within their own organization. What does it mean if diverse inclusion is not being addressed, executed, identified within corporations? Well, it's more or less the implications of inclusions. If they're not being employed, you often have that unconscious bias. So when decisions are being made from an executive or leadership perspective, there are key gaps that will not address all of the needs and situations for all of those diverse human elements that we saw earlier, from a values perspective, from a culture perspective, from an age and gender perspective. That means that an organization could have unfair policies that they are using to drive their employee engagement, their employee participation, and their just hiring practices in general. High employee turnover, right? Employee retention is often a factor within organizations who don't have initiatives that address inclusion, right? Because if an employee is not feeling valued or feeling heard, as we see and as we saw, that is a key concern of millennials, a company has the risk of incurring costs that result in a loss of an employee and the costs that are incurred to hire new employees. However, if issues of diversity and inclusion aren't addressed, you will have those same situations occur over and over and over again. The loss of market share. This will come to realization when you have customers that are committed to ensuring that they're working with other organizations and partners that have diversity initiatives, like Illinois American Water. If there are suppliers and vendors that don't meet that policy that we have brought forth, and mind you, those policies and procedures were created from a diverse team of stakeholders within the internal team to say, well, what is it that we need to do? What should we consider when we're wanting to reach out to diverse businesses and offer opportunities to manufacture our products and produce our services, right? That came about as a direct result of inclusive decision-making practices. So organizations whose customers are requesting that type of reporting or policy, they have a realization of losing that particular market share in that customer, so profit loss there. Stagnant culture, lagging culture, a culture that is threatening, a culture that is problematic because it evokes more labeling of people. If you address the diversity piece and not the inclusion piece, you risk placing people in buckets, right? Just labeling them, which just fosters division. Focusing on inclusion does the opposite. It acknowledges that your employees are human beings, that there are differences and personal traits that influence their needs and behavior as an employee within the organization, right? So by creating an inclusive workplace, you can ensure that everyone is given that best opportunity to succeed. And in doing that, in doing so, you will create a more diverse company. Employees will be happier, there will be more productivity, and customers will be loyal. They'll be more loyal, right? So in summary, I just want these items to be your takeaway, right? A diverse workplace can capture a greater share of the consumer market if you address strategies that ensure that you're pulling in diverse vendors and diverse a population of talent. Recruiting from a diverse pool of candidates means a more qualified workforce. In order to do that, you may change your avenues for which you do recruiting. You may try to understand organizations that are diverse in scope. For example, if you are in the energy business, you may align yourself with the African American Black engineers. If you are a company like ours who is heavily utilizes professional services and engineers, you may want to affiliate or associate with the National Society of Black Engineers. So you may change some of those avenues and practices for which you're out there identifying a diverse pool of candidates. A diverse and inclusive workforce helps businesses avoid employee turnover costs. Organizations who are not as productive and are lower performers in the low quartile of performance of corporations in their same industry, they suffer from high retention. Their turnover rates are higher, and their costs incurred for hiring new employees is greater because they have not addressed all of those needs that ensure that an employee is in a safe environment first and foremost, and in an environment that's going to value their idea and include them in those decision-making processes. Business needs to adapt, right? In this change in our world of the Me Too movement, in the era where there's being more focused attention on organizations that are bringing forth situations and circumstances that specifically address a non-inclusion, businesses just need to adapt. And this is not a trend. It's not a buzzword. It is something that has proven to be a driving force of revenue as well as performance of employees within the organization, productivity. Diversity is a key aspect of entrepreneurialism. Whether your diversity is going to address talent, the human element, or whether diversity initiatives you can employ by identifying diverse businesses that you work with directly, vendors, suppliers of your own. It's a key aspect of assuming and identifying innovation and driving down your costs. Diversity in the workplace is necessary to create a competitive economy. We talked about that a little bit also in the entrepreneurial piece. Diversity in the boardroom is needed to leverage the company's full potential. Again, I can't speak enough on how important this element is. And to be honest, I was not able to see a direct correlation between that until I assumed this role as the corporate diversity lead with Illinois American Water. I've always had responsibilities for working directly with senior leaders and various business units across the organization, but to be included in a weekly meeting where the VPs and the senior levels meet to discuss every aspect of the business. And not only that, I have seen instances where there has been a lack of, or some unconscious bias, I will say it that way. There has been some unconscious bias in that room because of that, which is why it is a key strategy of our president and CEO to ensure that even in the boardroom, you have a diverse representation of your employee base, your talent, and your business unit representatives. Supplier diversity efforts, strategies are now encompassed in D&I. I remember when supply diversity just solely lied within the procurement space, the supply chain space. But now, because of the inclusion piece and the importance of ensuring that not only are we identifying diverse suppliers, participants, vendors for our potential projects and our RFPs, we are ensuring that there's language in our contracts that includes them. So you've transformed your initiative from one that just tracks information on the number of hires that you have, the types of hires that you have, to one that indicates, so, well, what business opportunity is this driving within the organization? So changing your diversity strategies to not only just measure and track, but to also include, that is going to be where the true value is in this diversity and inclusion initiative. I'm trying to go to my final slide, which is just, okay. Well, how do we do that? I'm positive that everyone that's participating on this call today has engaged in diversity in some fashion. If not diversity and inclusion, in diversity efforts, right? So for an organization's journey to become more inclusive, it begins with us, each individual. It begins with you. So what actions currently within your organization is your organization taking, or you taking, to foster a more inclusive work culture? You know, where those unique ideas, attributes, beliefs, backgrounds, talents, capabilities, where they're all welcomed, and how are you leveraging that within the organization for a learning opportunity and just better informing business decisions in all levels of the organization? And this is just a question I wanted to leave with all of the attendees on the series today, to go back within your own organization and understand, yes, you may have a diverse workforce, but what are you doing that is inclusive, that can drive those business imperatives that we've talked about earlier in the presentation? So that is my final slide.
All right, thank you very much, Rhonda. So everybody, if you want to take the next couple of minutes, if you have any questions, please feel free to type that in your question box at the bottom of your webinar panel. And I actually have a question for you, Rhonda, and just a little bit of feedback of what we're doing here at Higher Level. So right now, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so right now we are working on kind of what we think building in diversity, which could mean lots of things to a lot of people. The first step, I feel like, is training our internal team members to even recognize opportunities, or to really even know what we're talking about. So what advice would you give if this is a newer initiative within a company, of kind of integrating it to what is already happening in the organizations, and, you know, different training ideas or opportunities for
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And thank you, Erin, and that's an excellent question. So, and I appreciate that. So, and one of the things with a newer, especially a newer initiative, and not saying that you have a newer initiative, but within the corporations that I have worked with, the training and awareness piece was critical, right? So people who thought they knew what diversity was about didn't really have the full understanding or idea. So one of my key roles is training. I have gone out and I will be conducting training that really kind of pulls together just basic information on what diversity means, right? And some of this training, it goes back to even legislation that was created back in the 1960s, if you want to talk about the business diversity of it, right? So there were mandates that started the practice of diversity, but what has happened is, again, it became more of a tracking mechanism than how do you include this in your organization. So one of the things, Erin, that I would encourage you and your organization to do is just to have small forms of training sessions where individuals are coming together, and there is someone, and there are organizations who do this professionally, right? They have specific content and the data and the statistics that they share with regards to what diversity is. And one of the reasons why I say you have to understand what types of diversity you want to address, because again, if you're familiar with the diversity awareness partnership, they're an organization, and a lot of their training and awareness that they do on behalf of corporations is specifically addressed unconscious bias. I would start there, because to understand what diversity is, we have to understand the natural biases that lie within every individual with regards to, okay, now I understand what diverse is, what being diverse is. Now I need to understand what I need to do to ensure that they are addressed. So what often happens as a next step is corporations create, I guess I would say, diversity councils or advisory councils, where they just have people who want to be a part of the change, volunteer, and share ideas on what they can do within their own organization to ensure that they're sharing all of these wonderful cultural things within their own organization. Usually every corporation starts with some type of advisory committee or forum or diversity council where they get together and pull their ideas together and understanding what they think some of the biases are or the gaps that exist within their own organization. I'm sorry, Erin, I know I gave you a long response.
No, I appreciate
But those are quick wins that usually happen just by identifying people in the organization that want to be a part of the conversation. It starts with the dialogue and the training.
Great, thank you. Well, sounds like we're headed in the right direction based on your responses, so I appreciate that.
Oh, wonderful, and congratulations to your organization. My organization, for example, just started a brand ambassadors program. So what we did was we reached out to our employee base and say, we are looking for representatives who are engaged in the community on various levels, whatever the diversity organizations are that you want to be a part of, or you want the company to get involved with and engage, bring that so we can have conversations. It's such a new idea that our employees are just meeting to understand, well, what do our goals look like? What are our objectives? But it starts with just the interest of people who are diverse in scope coming together and say, you know what? We don't do anything for Latino Month. Can we do something? And that drives the conversation there.
All right, great, thank you. All right, well, I do not see any other questions coming in. So again, I want to thank everyone for spending their morning with us. And thank you again, Rhonda. So our next webinar program for our higher level monthly webinar will be coming up on Wednesday, May 16th. And we are actually partnering with, his name is Brandon Dempsey. He is the partner at Go Brand Lewis, and he'll be covering leadership and branding within your company. So feel free to reach out to me. I'll provide you my email address. It's ekopec@higherlevel.com if you're interested in registering or if you have any more information or questions about today's webinar. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Erin.